He was an enthusiast, incredibly enthusiastic. And this particular evening, we were sitting on this boat down here, and snowstorm raging, and he was incredibly, when I went in there, he was incredibly wound up. He was already on his third or fourth gin and tonic, and I wasn't drinking because I was driving. I had to drive home. But, and he was bursting to tell me something, but couldn't. I said, what the hell is it? And he said, there's something that's going to happen very soon that's going to change this country forever. And I thought, uh-oh, this is...
I've always been interested in spying. I was at Westminster School, the central London boarding school that produced Kim Philby, the arch traitor of the British intelligence service, whose smooth demeanour convinced everyone while he passed on secrets to the Soviet Union. It also produced the latest chief of MI6, Blaise Metravelli. Maybe there's something retrograde about being a spy. This idea of betrayal and whose side are you on, and secrets. It's like the platonic love affairs, and not always platonic, that existed between teenage boys, 13 or 14, with strong passions towards the same or opposite sex, where fidelity matters so much, and bonds of love and loyalty are forged and tested and discarded. Howard Brooks is 78 years old and is looking back on his life. And there's a kind of symbiosis, a mutual dependency. He lost his son about my age 13 years ago, and I'm wondering if he looks for a son-like figure. Tell his story to someone who understands him, who understands his alienation and understands the spy game, who's educated and speaks good English. Becomes a partnership in a strange country in some ways. He's also an old man looking back at his life and trying to make sense of it, trying to conjoin his different identities of a successful artist and perhaps a successful spy. Is there one personality, or is it a fragmented personality? What's his narrative? And then there's me. My motives are perhaps shallower but deep at the same time. I'm looking for a solution to the Palme murder, which I first got interested in 13 or 14 years ago. I ended up writing the only English language biography of Sweden's assassinated prime minister. I didn't give that much attention to the assassination itself because all the trails sprawled in different directions. But I did settle on what's been known as the South African trail, possibly with British and American help. And he offers a substantial jigsaw piece. He's also the first genuine spy I've ever talked to. I mean, my knowledge is completely in the abstract. I've read books and contest some of my theories on what it's actually like to be a spy who came in from the cold. There's a moment of conflict though, because halfway through the interview, it's carried out over 2 days, I wonder if not he is the object, the target, but I am. He's interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing him. But was there an anxiety in the early 80s that Sweden, I mean, I remember, as I said, I had a very clear memory because I was very politically interested. I was in my early teens, and just before I knew I wanted to go back to England. I didn't want to be a Swede. I wanted to be an Englishman, you know, and I felt that my language was being chosen. Good question. So there was a flurry of books. I was very inexperienced, of course. Flurry of books and ideas that were coming from SAF, the Swedish Arbetsgivarförening, and various Danish writers and so on, talking about Sweden as being a totalitarian society.
There was a book called The New Totalitarian.
That's right, by Roland Huntford.
I read it, yeah.
And I thought that was gospel, you know, that was gospel for me.
Yeah.
And then he went on to become a writer on the Antarctic, a very good writer on the Antarctic. And I think he was still alive 2 years ago when I last checked. And then, you know, you had this guy called, you had the scandals about the sterilization and, you know, women being sterilized because and so there was this idea that Sweden being and it was all over the news in abroad, but not in Sweden. But it fed back into Swedish, so the Swedish so-called dissident right, you know, convinced that Palme was, you know, like turning Sweden into the new East Germany, and of course, the circulated rumours among the army or certain army officers that, you know, he was going to turn Sweden into a Soviet republic. And of course it was these submarine intrusions. I wrote a book about the submarine intrusions, and of course Pankin was the guy who had to go called up to the Swedish Foreign Ministry and said, no, they were not our submarines. So you were very much part of this. I mean, the Cold War was a much bigger thing late Cold War. It was a much bigger thing in Sweden than it was in the UK, because by the time I got to the UK in 1985, no one ever talked about that. People were talking about totally other things, you know. But Sweden still felt like a frontline state. So you were part of this incredibly interesting. You're a very interesting contact for me, because how did you deal with this? I mean, did you respond to the anxiety from MI6 that Sweden really was going down the wrong route?
I remember my English guy. It's wonderful not using his name. In Stockholm, we talked about the new totalitarians. We had long discussions about it and how much. And I was interested to find out that Sweden is a country where the state has a grip over citizens to the effect that the citizens belong to the state. They don't have the individual. As soon as you give someone a number, I thought this thing with the show number when I came here was absolutely dreadful. And I was thinking, shouldn't you have it tattooed here, like in Auschwitz? You know, it's just like, and this respect for the state and the rest of it, coming from a rather anarchistic Liverpool, you know, I thought it was. And then when I was trying to build my artistic career here, I was always up against the tax authorities. They always suspected that I was dodging. And they really followed me, you know. They came home and they went through all my papers, and it really was Big Brother stuff. I hated it. And I never got into trouble then. I never found anything. But this getting recorded letters, you know, saying you have to come to this tax office in Gothenburg on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And I certainly felt this.
Palme was taking Sweden.
I don't think so at all. Not at all.
They weren't?
No. They were more interested in Palme's relation to the Vietnam situation, Southeast Asia. They were Palme's relation to South Africa and against apartheid.
Anyway, so yeah, so they were not worried about Palme. We can talk about South Africa as well, actually, because I was down there and talking to them about Sweden and Swedish affairs. So, well, tell me what you were reporting back and what they felt about Palme.
During 1985 and the beginning of 86, there was such a hatred towards Palme. There was a sort of campaign. There were these grotesque caricature drawings of Palme. There were so many right-wing people that really hated him. I didn't feel then that they had any real reason to. I mean, he wanted to there was all this talk about Löntagare fonder, maiden of fonder. I don't think Palme was terribly enthusiastic about that.
It was resolved anyway by then, I think.
Oh, sure. But I mean, this had all been part of the general Social Democrats have always been more interested in big industries. ASEA, Volvo. I remember saying to my wife some time before the murder that if I had the opportunity to spend an evening with Palme, have dinner with him, and I'm sure I'd like him. I think I'd find him terribly interesting. I would certainly share an awful lot of views with him. Definitely. Although that I'm in no way a socialist. I am these days more. I've sort of backtracked on my original conservatism to. I don't like the lack of equality in Sweden these days. Too many rich people, too many poor people.
Yeah, Sweden has the highest wealth inequality, not income inequality, but wealth inequality in the world.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Because they don't have whatever is it, inheritance tax or something. But so the MI6 were not particularly worried then about Palme.
I don't know. I didn't feel it to be that way, and Palme was certainly not a point of discussion that we had.
Would they have told you everything?
No.
They might not.
Of course, in this world, there are so many watertight bulkheads, you know. You meet one person, but you don't meet his next person. It's very much one-on-one. You don't have any real idea about the structure of things, you know. You don't know how intelligence people are related to each other. But I did meet the people who worked in that office in Stockholm, 5 or 6 people. Basically quite dull civil servants, you know. 1 or 2 quite interesting. Because with my meetings with the Russians, I had to report back the same evening, usually. So if I'd been out to have a drink with a Russian, I'd meet up some other place and of rapporteur, I'd report what we discussed, the names that came up and the rest. One thing I was going to mention was that what we never knew at all was how much the Russians realized my involvement with the British intelligence service.
Right.
Because they never mentioned it.
Right.
They never asked me.
Right.
They never tried to find out.
Right.
And my English guy, he said, that's because they know.
Of course, yeah.
They know. And we have good information that there is in Moscow, in the Kremlin, a section where they store all papers. They put everything on paper. You know. No computers. And down there, there's that much on you. You realise
Right.
there's that much. It's all your conversations
Right.
are there.
Right.
You have been scrutinised all the way. I was told by the setup people that in the beginning that what you got to watch out for is they'll maybe lay a honey trap for you. There were
Right.
some gorgeous little ballerinas
Right.
pop up.
Right. They didn't do any of that.
Nothing. I could say that I was bribed by both sides with lovely bottles of booze.
Right. Yeah.
So I got lots of vodka from the Russians and a lot of gin from the English.
Right. But you got an income from the English, didn't you?
No,
No.
not a penny.
Right. Well.
I was completely. I realised, and this is interesting. I realised that as soon as I started getting paid, you know, I couldn't afford that for my family.
Well, perhaps because then they could then call you an agent or something, or you'd be compromised by being paid. Is that what you're saying?
No. Yes.
But you'd be financially dependent on them, and then they'd ask for more, and you'd have to give
Yeah.
more or something.
Yeah. But I was an agent anyway.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
My last English guy said to me, I was doing this for 20 years.
Right.
He said, you know, you're really our longest serving agent, you know.
Right.
20 years is a good whack, you know.
Right.
You've really been... and then all contact with them was broken in 2000. But I went on having contact with my Russian. But the English weren't interested anymore.
Had you done something wrong? Crossed the line or something, or they'd lost confidence in you, or you betrayed them or something?
I was in London it must have been 2010, and I thought, I have to look up my first English guy. I'll find out where he lives and go and see him. So I did. Lived in a lovely house in Wandsworth, and he put on a lovely dinner with his wife, and so we had a fantastic conversation about the early days. And when I was leaving, and he was particularly pissed. They're all drinkers, these people. The last thing he said to me was, now you can run off home and tell your Russian friends all about it. I said, you don't really believe that I would. He said, we never knew with you. We never knew if you were. I never.
But what information would you have had about their MI6's activities that would have been interesting to the Russians? Did you have?
Oh, it could be anything. You know. I wasn't that interested in the business. And I didn't tend to paranoia. You know, you could say that the nature of the job can lead a lot of people to spend a lot of time being very nervous. You know, even the toughest of guys can be, in the situations I was in, nervous about things or paranoid. Like always having this feeling they're being followed somewhere. That also comes with the job. I never had that. I mean, it could be him, could he be? I don't care. Plus, I was never afraid. What could they do? They could shoot me, kidnap me. I'm basically an existentialist. I think life is wonderful in its richness and the tremendous amount of experience we have. My mum said before she died, be grateful for all the things you've had. Be grateful for it. You know, you've had a rich life, lots of stuff. And this is, of course, Camus, Sartre, and these writers. They say that even bad stuff is stuff. There's nothing worse in life to find life totally boring. You know, what the French call ennui. It's grey, nothingness.
So you did it for the thrills, almost like the artistic... No?
I wouldn't say that. I went along with it. I did it, but I went along with it because I was curious. Curiosity is something that motivates me a lot. I'm interested. I find it interesting. This in a society and in a world where there's so much worry and energy and Cold War stuff, suddenly to be a part of it was interesting.
Did you feel that you had access to a world view and an understanding of the world that normal people reading the papers didn't get? That you understood how the real world functions in a better way through these secret contacts that you had? That's how it works. That's what makes the world tick, not what you read in the papers, not what the average person thinks.
Of course.
That's what people say is a drug, you know, of being...
I realised that all these diplomats that I was mingling with, they were all interested in getting higher status, higher respect, climbing sort of a career pole. But my first English guy, he got the sack eventually in about 80, late 80s. He was at a diplomatic party one evening, a lot of foreign diplomats and stuff, and he was drunk as usual. And someone said something that upset him so much, he hit this guy. He hit him in the face.
Wow.
Or in the chin.
Wow.
He floored him.
Right.
So that was the end of his job.
Was that while he was still in Stockholm?
Yeah.
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't anything to do with Palme. It was after that. I mean, I thought we've got to mention it because you said that you had spent. I'd love to meet you again, by the way. But the night was it 2 nights before the assassination. This guy said, you know, it's going to happen.
It's coming down.
So, tell us about that, and tell us about what you thought about how he could have known and.
Well, he was often in a very nervous sense of excitement, enthusiasm, boiling with stuff. He was an enthusiast, incredibly enthusiastic. And this particular evening, we were sitting on this boat down here, and a snowstorm raging, and he was incredibly, when I went in there, he was incredibly wound up. He was already on his 3rd or 4th gin and tonic, you know, and I wasn't drinking because I was driving. I had to drive home. But, and he was bursting to tell me something, but couldn't. I said, what the hell is it? And he said, there's something that's going to happen very soon that's going to change this country forever. And I thought, this is... And then we were talking, I remember we were talking about all sorts of other stuff. He was interested in people, and he had this large contact net with important people. There was this scandal of this man called Refat al-Sayed.
Oh yeah, I remember.
With his...
Some Egyptian businessman or something.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time...
Fake doctorate or something like that.
Yeah. We talked a lot, that evening we talked a lot about him. We talked a lot about Per Gyllenhammar, the Volvo chief, who I knew well. And he wanted to know about Gyllenhammar's love affairs that he was notorious for. And if I knew the women involved, which I did, things that with people in power were a liability. They could be subject to sorts of pressures, stuff, scandals. That was certainly the theme of the evening. And we decided I should come into Stockholm at the weekend, on Saturday or Sunday or something. And so when he left, I sat on the boat and he went off to get a taxi. I remember this figure, he had black coat and scarf, this figure storming out into the night, and he was waving his arms and thinking. And the other strange thing he said to me that evening was, you know, there's a hell of a lot of activity going on. They've picked up a lot of radio traffic coming from the Russian embassy, and the Russians at the moment are going crazy. So there's something that's got them involved. I've certainly had a feeling that wasn't true.
Wasn't?
I thought it might have been a deflection in the event of what was about to happen. But he had all sorts of strange contacts. You know, he used to meet, obviously, diplomats from other countries. He was interested in Libyans. He was convinced that Libyan secret police were following him to his flat in Stockholm. And I remember I was there one time and come on, look at those two guys standing down there. They got binoculars in. Yes, Libyan. What that was about, I don't know.
If did he actually mention the name Palme, or did he just say there's something big happening?
No, didn't mention Palme at all.
Right, he just said there's a big event happening.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you knew him after the event, and
oh, sure.
Yeah, so you presumably knew that was the event he was referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So did you say to him, or why didn't he warn the Swedes? You know?
Yeah, I did. I came out not that weekend, but the following weekend, and he took me and his wife out to Ulrika Dahl's Värdshus, very nice place, where we discussed this. And he said that he was shocked, surprised. He said that evening he'd been at the theatre with his wife, and he'd been to see a friend of mine in a play. I fixed a visit to this theatre, and they'd been there at the theatre and then they'd gone straight home. That was his story. And the first he knew about it was that in the small hours of the morning his phone rang, and it was the American CIA chief in Stockholm, who was in a total state of total panic, he said. And he said, first thing he said was, "For God's sake, it wasn't us, it wasn't us." Which,
That's what the CIA person said.
yeah,
Right.
and my friend thought this highly amusing. It's very, very un-British.
Yeah.
Hey, it wasn't us, hey.
So that person said it to to your contact. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, there seems to be that narrative has changed. I mean, in 20 or 30 years ago, when somebody's talking about an intelligence agency doing it, it's nearly always someone in the West. But now there's a couple of writers who said it's the KGB who did it, and they're citing this radio traffic from the Russian embassy as evidence or a sign. But I tend not to believe it.
If it's true.
Well, I think that, I mean, the point is that they say that the Russian, they say that they had a Russian voice. They'd recorded, they'd bugged some Russian diplomat who said, talking to his wife, and his wife said, "Oh, he's such a nice man, why should it happen?" So maybe the Russians knew, but just because the Russians knew doesn't mean they did it. Just as, so,
No.
So what I'm wondering is if there's if both East and West knew about it, why did no one warn Palme? And is there such a thing? Is there a kind of, do the KGB and MI6 and CIA communicate at a very high level to say, to sort of, to check notes with each other, and so that they don't encroach on the others, they don't assassinate someone else's leader, as it were, or something like that. So, and they don't create a nuclear war type situation. So the fact that they both knew, both East and West, was that they'd communicated it with each other, and that they said, well, it's a Swedish affair or something, and we'll stay out of this.
I don't think they communicated with each other.
Okay.
I think my strongest suspicion comes from the fact that my Englishman was in such heavy contact with South Africans. And there was this guy who had a computer firm just up the street from the Beckers. Max 200 yards. Just, that's the closest place to the murder you could get.
Wow.
And I was told that I could meet this guy. I should go up and meet him because he had wall space for my paintings. He said, you get to know him, he's okay, you know, he's a South African. And I, of course, wondered what the hell my guy was doing with the South African. What was there? Business. And I think their business was the murder. I don't think the British were actually in any way involved with the murder, but they were informed about it.
Informed that it was going to happen.
Yeah.
I was down in South Africa a few years ago, and I talked to, I don't know how much you know about it, but there's a guy called Craig Williamson, who was head of a South African sort of a foreign assassinations unit.
Yeah, I read about him.
Yeah, and he was in Stockholm. Everyone knows that. I mean, I've been talked to several sources who've come that. And I think that, and then I didn't get to talk to him. He doesn't want to talk to any journalists, but I talked to, through my contacts, I got to talk to the secretary of the South African intelligence, secretary of the National Security Council. He's a very well-connected guy, still alive, nice man. He blamed the British, but of course, it could be the South Africans casting the blame on someone else, you know. He said all the orders came from MI6 and we were just patsies or proxies or whatever. But he provided no proof. So, and of course, the South African motive is a given one. Of course, that Palme was spent half the money to the ANC came came from Sweden and the other half from the Soviet Union. So that allowed the Soviets, they subsidized the hard stuff. But the complicating factor is that at least later in the 1980s, the ANC was thoroughly infiltrated by MI6. And there's a guy, I've interviewed him, God, what's his name, who wrote a book about the history of MI6 without using any of their archives. I mean, just through using, but it's, I can send you the book, I can send you the name later. But he said that Mandela was an MI6 contact. And certainly the ANC office in London, people like Maharaj were infiltrated by MI6. So if they were really working, if ANC was working with the British, because the Brits realised that apartheid is over and they've got to have their own party in power. And if Palme was supporting ANC, why would the Brits be interested in bumping off Palme if Palme was on their side, as it were? So I was always confused by that.
I think it's to do with business and deals and money.
Yeah.
When everything comes down to it, it's about money.
Howard Brooks was born in 1947 into a middle-class, stable family from the Liverpool area. His father was a bank manager. Actually, one of his customers in the 1960s was John Lennon. Howard went to grammar school and then to art school in Cheltenham, where he got his first taste of the spy world, because Cheltenham is the headquarters of the government Central Communications Agency. He moved to Sweden in 1970 at the age of 23 and got married and established himself as an artist, spending part of his time in the small town of Marstrand outside Gothenburg. He had 3 children and developed an artistic style which resembles, well, some say it's like David Hockney, or perhaps Edward Hopper, or even Salvador Dali, although he hates the latter description. He owned art galleries in Gothenburg and Marstrand. Many people came. He became something of a local figure, never losing his English accent when speaking Swedish. Russians came to his art gallery. He made friends with them. In 1982, he was approached by somebody called B from MI6, who, looking at his collection of Elgar, said, "You can work for us." By now, he'd made contact with a Soviet diplomat. Let's call him M. M and B didn't meet, but Howard worked as a conduit between the Soviet Foreign Ministry and MI6 and the British Foreign Office. He went to drink with the Soviets. They introduced him to some leading figures who swung by Sweden and stopped to drink with him. He was a true back channel, a way for the Soviets and the Brits to communicate. Geoffrey Howe, the Foreign Secretary under Margaret Thatcher, faxed him questions. He passed the questions on to the Soviets. It was enjoyable, it was high stakes, but Howard had his criticisms.
What I became very tired of was the way the British always presume that the Russians are the enemy and will always be the enemy, and we should keep it that way. It's always like it's important to have that, because without that their existence isn't guaranteed. So my interest was breaking that down, actually pulling down the wall.
Mine too, yeah.
Come on, we're educated, cultivated human beings, and we can talk about these things. We don't have to be enemies. We don't have to go around poisoning people or blackmailing people and doing all that. But the Russians are dirty, they really are. They can be very, the British can be dirty too. And the British have a permanent sort of arrogance, we British, we think that we're superior somewhat, because we are.
But don't you think that, everything that MI6 and the British press says about Russia and Russian intelligence and assassinations might be true, but what's lacking in the British press is the fact that we do it too. We also do bad things,
Yeah.
and sometimes we start those bad things. So when you're reporting the East-West conflict, it's like reporting only one side of a bar fight. You know, if I punch you and you punch me,
I know.
if we cut off the fact that I punched you first, then you get the impression that it was unprovoked aggression
But
against me.
it's the complete lack of any interest in stopping this. You know?
That's right.
Like going into the bar fight and say, stop,
That's right.
stop now.
Exactly.
No more fighting.
Go back to when you were talking to your MI6 friend about Palme. Did he regret not having told the Swedish authorities? Because if you hear about a normal civil life, if you hear about a murder and you don't talk a murder that's going to happen and you don't tell the police, then in some ways you're
Oh no!
responsible.
I told Seppo. Of course.
You told Seppo.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I had my constant contact with my Seppo guy, and he said, "This investigation is such a mess. You know, they had this Hans Holmér. He went chasing Kurds. You know,
Right,
he
right.
said, for God's sake, it took
Right.
so much energy
Right.
and time.
Right.
Complete waste of time.
Right.
And then there was another guy. They had a phantom picture, and then Krista Pettersson, of course, came into it. And
But Seppo was supposed to be involved as well. I mean,
oh sure,
yeah.
but you know there was this huge team up in Stockholm.
A few weeks before the assassination, B offered Howard space in an office in Tunnelgatan in central Stockholm, owned by a South African called Brian Turner. He could exhibit his work there if he wanted. Tunnelgatan is the street where Palme was assassinated a few weeks later. Howard said no to being exhibited. It was off the beaten track, but he thinks that Brian Turner and his office might have been connected to the assassination. But this guy, what gave you the impression that this guy had intelligence connections? The guy whose gallery, whose office you were
I don't
to?
know. I don't know.
Okay.
But all his connections were something to do with something. You know,
Right.
so they weren't just. He didn't say, you know, gallery owners or professionals. Or
Right.
It was all
So-
connected with the intelligence work.
So your theory or your hypothesis is that this owner might have been connection to the actual South African hitmen.
Yeah, sure.
And you and perhaps they hid there or reconnoitred from that place or used that as a base or something.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's a glass door, reception area, some rooms. It's so easy to just get in and
Right.
disappear, you know,
Right.
really. I don't think the police went in there,
Right.
investigated it.
Right.
They should have completely combed the whole area down to the last little
Right.
details.
Right.
Looking for cameras, looking for microphones, whatever.
Right.
So Brian Turner's dead, okay.
Well, he was born in 39, so he would have been 37 in 1986.
Yeah, I knew
So-
him, I knew him.
And he's got a wife called Titi.
Yeah. There were all sorts of peripheral people around the British Embassy in Stockholm.
So I wonder if his wife might know about all this. She might be, no. Did you have contact with him after the murder,
Who?
Brian Turner? You didn't talk to him about it,
I
right?
think so. No, I had no. Ingen beröringspunkt alls.
But I mean, it's incredible that your testimony was ignored by the Säpo, unless they wanted to hide something. I think, you know.
I could put it in another way. That I think that all the time these people never took me seriously. It's like I've had tremendous success as an artist, really, because I've sold all my paintings. And look, I haven't made a lot of money, but in periods I've made. I have never been let into the Swedish establishment. Never. They don't write about me in the local papers here, ever. I'm blacklisted, in fact. The chance of me having one of my paintings in the art museum here is nothing. I'm a complete outsider, which in a way is quite comfortable. You know, I'm not a celebrity. Although some people who appreciate what I do, they think they call me the best. You're the best living artist, you know. So what? I'm not a scandal. I don't know. We none of us know how we come across to other people. We get a vague idea. We get some sort of reflection of, but.
We come across as a very impressive person, you know, knowledgeable, the perfect Englishman in a way. I don't know why. I mean, my mum's always struggled. I don't even try to get through in the Swedish media, and I'm not interested. I'm just using this as a base, you know, for my reconquest of the Anglo world. But my mum always had problems getting a proper career going as an artist in Sweden. She just couldn't be part. She was rejected from Konstfack and things like that. And I think my views of Sweden were heavily influenced by her, because she came back to Sweden in '76 and spent much of her time with the tax authorities, as you were, and terrified of them. And we were because we were speaking English at home, you know, rumours were that we'd be taken away and put in some children's home or something. I mean, it was just a rumour.
I know.
But there was
It
that
was
fear
like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Absolutely.
And, Huntford wrote about that, you know.
When they arrested Ingmar Bergman in a theatre,
Yeah.
they arrested him. Astrid Lindgren was
That's right.
target.
That's right. So a lot of the criticism of Palme, I mean, people romanticize this period as being the time when Sweden had never been so equal and pre-globalism and all that. But actually, there was a lot of authoritarianism.
Oh, I hated it all. I still have a complete aversion to social democrats, you know.
Right.
I don't think I would choose Sweden again.
There's a moment of conflict, though, because halfway through the interview, it's carried out over 2 days. I wonder if not he is the object, the target, but I am. He's interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing him.
But I mean, to me, what the intelligence agencies do is they have three. One is that they collect information, and then the second is that sometimes they carry out coups, sometimes they carry out kinetic operations, in some cases assassinations. And then the third one is that they carry out propaganda. And a lot of people think that the intelligence agencies only do the first part, but they also do the second and third. And when I didn't know, I think that I was reading this in a history of MI6. I mean, in the 1920s and 30s, the British were sponsoring, Muslim groups all over the Soviet Union. I mean, The point is, Stalin was a bad guy, but even if he wasn't a bad guy, the British were attacking him through covert operations. So and what happens then is if any crackdown of that feeds into the British narrative of the Russians as being incorrigibly oppressive, but part of that oppression comes from the fact that they're under attack all the time.
Oh, sure.
And what happens is the Western media only reports the crackdowns and not the covert operations and the provocations and the coups and the buying of local politicians and the black propaganda that perhaps occasioned that crackdown. And so it's like, as I said, any quarrel, unless you have the full story, you can't just blame one side because everyone's at it. I had some strange things happen to me. I had this podcast, right? And sometimes door to my cottage has been left open overnight, and that's never happened before I did the podcast. And Abby had strange phone calls, like from voices, like somebody phoned me up from Bulgaria once and then put down the phone, and I phoned back and it was some peasant only speaking Bulgarian. So 4 or 5 strange things have happened to me, and I thought, well, I'll say it put on to me. They want to, but surely the best, and maybe my phone is tapped or something. I don't know, but I mean, it's hard because I speak fluent English, speak fluent Swedish. Who am I? You know, I must come across as a very odd person. They can't categorize me. So theoretically, they might have said, well, you know, what's the best way to find out who he really is? I mean, let's get one of our contacts to talk to him and find out who he really is and what he goes for and what's he up to? You know, is he a bona fide journalist, or is he some kind of, I don't know, spy or something? And and then they thought, maybe you'll tell me some things, and if there's some, I don't know, I sound like I've read too many spy thrillers in a way I haven't read anything about tradecraft, but let's say you could feed me some information that's false, and if that information then turns up in Russia today, then they'll know that I'm in contact with the Russians, right? It's called a barrier meal, apparently. And they say, oh, so this guy is an asset, you know, we'll have to do something else. Are you on my case?
I'm primarily interested in revealing the truth about things.
Right.
The little details I give you is just part of a picture of the world that I've been living through and who I am. And I just want to be a good boy, I suppose.
Well, I'll just tell you, I mean, to me, this is just this is a standard journalistic job. I'm very interested in your story anyway. I'm interested in this combination between the spy and our mixed Anglo-Swedish backgrounds, and you're a very good storyteller, and you've revealed a little bit about the spy world and the Cold War that I find interesting. You're a very good talker. That's nothing more complicated. But as I said, the idea was planted into my head is that you're not the object of this interview. I might be.
Mm.
Am I?
Partly.
Wow.
I certainly haven't told you about other spies.
Right.
Who I've known.
Right.
I don't give you any secret information about the broader picture of spying in Sweden.
So are you reporting to someone about our conversation?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
Right. Do you think I'm a target of the Swedish intelligence?
Target implies that you may be of interest to Swedish intelligence because you're dealing with these things. I'm sure that Säpo would be very interested in you and what you do. And I had a lot of contact with Säpo in the early days. And
right.
I had a very good contact with Säpo. It was very friendly. It was very nice. It was my friend B, on the other hand, he had a permanent disregard for Säpo and Swedish police. He thought they were flat-footed and stupid and slow and had a lot of very bad things to say about them. It wasn't my experience. I always felt very safe with Säpo. When I was involved with B and M, it was quite hazardous because they were raging alcoholics, both of them, in different ways. Especially M. I mean, I used to sit with evenings in his flat in Stockholm, and you know, he drank a bottle of vodka, whole bottle, and he'd been drinking all day. His drinking habits were astonishing. And B also was a typical Englishman. He just drank pints of gin and tonic, you know, and he was always fairly pissed and very charming. And as I told you, I always went home with a suitcase full of bottles. I got, you know, 3 or 4 bottles of vodka from M and 3 or 4 bottles of gin from... And if I had a tendency, then I could have become a serious alcoholic in those days.
How did you avoid it then?
But I just... Some people are alcoholics and some people are not alcoholics. It's as simple as that, you know. Sure, if you drink too much all the time, you're going to become an alcoholic. And there were pauses between my meetings with them anyway, so... and I have never painted a single brushstroke with alcohol in my system. So I have some sort of regulator.
Was it, I mean, there's a Russian saying apparently, you never trust what anyone says before 10 p.m, you know?
Yeah.
Is that true? Was that part of the tradecraft that you got people drunk?
I didn't get anyone drunk. They certainly got themselves drunk, but I would say they certainly trusted me when they'd seen that I was drinking.
This guy B, I mean, didn't he get in trouble with MI6 for drinking? I mean, are they quite lenient about it?
No, it's only when he got fired.
Right. He got fired in '89 or something when he smashed someone on the jaw. Right.
He hit someone. He was very funny. And I linked up with him again in the 2000s. I went to see him in London after many years. And we had a huge laugh about things. And he was a tough guy.
And he also said he never knew if you were a spy or not for the Russians.
I don't think anyone ever trusts anyone, to be perfectly honest. I mean, unless you have a camera attached and a microphone attached and follows you all the time, there can always be a small doubt somewhere that, you know, you're not really, that there's maybe a slight feeling that, no, there doesn't appear to be anything suspicious. But the very best spies never give anything away, you know. He might be so bloody good at it that he doesn't give it away at all. It's this psychological world. It's the way...
But what does betrayal mean anyway in a world where everyone talks to each other? I mean...
Well, I think betrayal means giving away secrets. And
right.
If I'd been reporting to M a conversation I had with B, and I told him just generally about B, that it would be betraying.
So would that count as betrayal, you telling?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Certainly.
But isn't that justified by the need to create rapport with the person, and so you say some things?
But I was honest and open with them that I was essentially anti-communist. Mm. I don't believe in the principles of dialectic materialism and collectivism and things.
But was M a communist, or was he just...
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Certainly when I met him, you know, he had his party book and the rest of it, he swore to the communist principle. But when 1991 happened, he said that he got out of the foreign ministry and they went down to a cafe, he and his associates, and they burnt their party books on a table. And they weren't communists anymore. But what he is today, I don't know. I just think he's loyal. I think M is incredibly loyal to Russia. Simple as that.
But you had very open conversation. I mean, I guess the vulgar common idea of the Russians, or the Soviets I should say, was that they were totally brainwashed and they just ate potatoes and they were like simple primitive people. But you thought that these were very wide-ranging and open conversations you had with the Russians.
Well, we certainly discussed the idea of brainwashing. And the whole phrase brainwashing appeared sometime in the 50s, or there came this film, The Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah.
It's about Chinese...
North Korean.
And I said that my theory was that we were all brainwashed to some extent. We were all conditioned to the upbringing we had. I went to English schools. I went to a Methodist church. I listened to Methodist preachers. I consumed the media. I consumed the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and my interest in classical music was very much centered on Russian composers. That's my passion. All the way from Domazhinski and Glinka through the Big Five and Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, Shostakovich. You see the bust of Shostakovich on the piano. I have a great love of Shostakovich music, and I've certainly listened to most of what he wrote. I've always had an ambivalent feeling about Shostakovich because he was a poor chap. He was torn between loyalty to the system and being a free thinker. And if you read his biographies, he apparently said that he was terrified of being arrested all the time. He always had a suitcase packed in case he was hauled off in the middle of the night.
But I mean, a lot of the Swedish Finns, when Finland was part of the Russian Tsardom, there was a kind of one-upmanship from the Swedish Finns, because they said, we've got a bigger canvas for our writing and our diplomacy. And Mannerheim served in Persia, for instance, as part of the Tsarist Empire, and the Swedish businessmen had a much bigger market and so on, and they looked down on Sweden. I mean, so all we hear is, the Russians invaded Finland, and then that was bad. But in a way, for the Finnish Swedish elite, and all the elites were Swedish speaking, they'd drawn the long straw in a way. They were the lucky ones compared to the Swedes in Little Sweden.
I'm going to say something very unpopular, and that is, I think that Sweden, if you go back to the 40s, 30s, 20s and back, was a fairly primitive sort of country, Sure, Gothenburg had its trade, shipping. Stockholm had its place, but I think that Sweden was generally fairly backward. I remember once going with my father-in-law to the National Gallery in London, looking at English painting, and he said, I'm surprised, I see these landscapes and these family portraits, we're talking about Gainsborough and Constable and whatever stuff. He said that it gives the impression that people in England back in those days had it pretty okay. But how can this be when they were basically starving? They were slaves. Oh, I said, they were not slaves at all. Slavery was abandoned a long time ago. I think there was a sort of golden age in England where rural life was, for the most part, fairly present. When I've investigated my own family tree and my Brooks family, and it goes back to Staffordshire. And my Brooks' ancestors in Staffordshire, they were farmers and bakers. It was in the odd mare somewhere. And, I think right up through the 19th century, I think life was, at least for my family, fairly middle class. They were office workers, clerks, teachers maybe. All these people were highly religious but not involved in the church. They were eventually very non-conformist. So I always think of my England and my background was basically a very happy kind of place, you know. When I listen to Elgar, for example, or the other romantic composers like Vaughan Williams and Delius and Holst, they spread out canvases of something essentially English and essentially feeling very good.
When you went to, you said that B, I've covered this in the last, but I don't think I covered what you said later, because you said B warned you that something terrible is going to happen in Sweden 2 nights before the Palme assassination.
Yeah.
And then, but he never mentioned exactly what.
No.
And then 2 or 3 weeks later you met up and he pretended...
No, I met up within the weekend later.
Say a day later or a week later?
A week later.
A week later. And he pretended not to know. Or maybe he genuinely didn't remember what he'd said. Just tell that little story.
No, he just covered up for it. He didn't...
Right.
He didn't backtrack, ever.
Right. But he deflected, he changed the topic or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
do you think,
there was nothing I could do about it, you know.
But I mean, do you have a theory about? Did MI6 just know? Were they involved? Was it SEPA that briefed them? Was it their bugging of the Russians, or?
Well, I don't know. Of course, I can only speculate. Someone had said something to him, and who that was, I don't know. If my suspicion about South Africans is true, I think in that case it was South Africans, and B was certainly, he had a network of South Africans in Stockholm.
Right. Tell us that story about the office.
Yeah, on Tunnelgatan.
Yeah.
Now, if I'd followed through, and of course I was always pretty busy anyway, and I just didn't take time out to do it. I thought hanging paintings in an office up a side street maybe wasn't the best exposure I could have. But if I'd followed through with it, then I would have had my paintings hanging there, and I would have been there at the time of the Palme murder. I would have been just 100 meters away, which would have been very interesting.
And your theory is that maybe in some ways it was involved with could have been a place where... Yeah,
sure.
And that's just pure speculation, or do you have any hints?
He was open about certain security services in Stockholm. He was having a problem with Libyans at the time, and he was convinced that Libyans were stalking him. He had a camera and binoculars in his apartment and kept an eye on Libyan types who were hanging around. And he had one interesting contact, which also has a link with Palme murder, and was that he had a very close contact with a man who was known as Bomb Mannen. And now, Bomb Mannen was a very active, what's the word? Rättshaverist. Yeah. Troublemaker. Dangerous type. He'd threatened to blow up Kvällsåklagare, his villa. Krista Pettersson was also some sort of stooge for Bob Mannon.
Yeah.
He even lived in Bob Mannon's house. Now, B had contact with Bob Mannon and had interviewed him and met him quite a lot. I was very curious to know why, and he didn't give me any reason, but he said that Bob Mannon had contacts with people who were very much anti-Palme.
So I left him on the October afternoon, raining softly, took the tram back to the train station, and here I am, trying to make heads or tails of it. I'm less alarmed than I was during the interview. I don't necessarily think that the promise of helping me solve the Palme murder was the bait, the cheese, that would get me trapped into interviews with the Swedish security police. I don't think that he was sent out to scout out. I mean, you can find out more from talking to a person than reading all his books, as they say. You can get a feel for a person, and of course he's an expert in that. So maybe it was a kind of, in a metaphorical sense, that he was interviewing me, as he said, as much as I was interviewing him. But maybe that was only for his own private sense of peace of mind, that I was not just anyone and that he trusted me with his work. Now, what was his motive? I mean, he's lived his life in a kind of betrayal, he said. It's interesting, because I thought that swapping apples and pears is what spies do when they talk to each other. He was obviously being sent out by MI6 to talk to this very senior politician, diplomat, who shall remain nameless. So I don't know who it is. I looked at a couple of names on Wikipedia, and I can't work it out. But also a very senior plenipotentiary type who'd spent some time in the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Foreign Ministry, came to Sweden and was then prominent in post-independence Russia as well. So I don't know who it is, but he was detailed to talk to them. He acted as a middleman several times during the Kosovo crisis and during the 1980s, where Jeffrey Howes and later foreign ministers faxed him questions to ask to the Russians. So he's a true back channel. And according to the piece of the interview, which I decided not to air because it would have distracted from the central message, was that he was a go-between during the Kosovo conflict, when the Russians and the West were very close to an almost accidental shooting war over the airport at Pristina, I think it was. And he says that his contacts with both sides is what cooled things down. Maybe. He was obviously trusted by this guy. M drank with him, read his books, listened to Shostakovich, and he was in a neutral territory, Sweden, whereas B, his MI6 chief, used him for many years to carry out various missions and keeping tabs on what's going on in Sweden. So why did he decide? Was it just curiosity? He wants to know the truth, he said. So he said that he told me the details, very useful pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. MI6 were in the know. The British had either foreknowledge or were part of the planning. SEPA knew, he said so. And it was part of a kind of South African, Swedish intel operation. And this is not about the Palme murder and its details. I mean, there are other sources for that, but it was certainly very useful to have this inside view and how close South African intelligence were to the Brits. So were the Brits taken by surprise and didn't approve? Did they hear about it and then decided to warn the Swedes? But if the Swedes were okay with the assassination, the Brits decided to let it drop. Well, we shall see. But anyway, maybe we'll never know the answer, and maybe they're all involved. I mean, there was a woman who got raped in Sweden, and they couldn't jail the 6 perpetrators because they could never be sure which of the 6 actually penetrated the woman, and they all blamed each other. And I sometimes think intelligence agencies work together and they do these collective plots for which they can all individually be blamed, and then circulate the rumor that so-and-so is blamed so-and-so and so-and-so, and you can never quite nail it down. A bit like the Russiagate thing, where you never know it was an FBI operation, an Obama operation, a Hillary Clinton operation, an MI6 operation, or a CIA operation aimed at dislodging Trump from power. Well, maybe the truth was all of them, and they all collaborated. Maybe the truth about the Palme assassination was it MI6, was it South African intelligence, was it SEPA? Well, maybe it was all of them. Anyway, this is an elderly man of good character, and I think he's got a solid family, and obviously very popular, judging by Facebook photos, very accomplished artist and composer, and a man who, perhaps seeking truth, wants to get his contribution to the truth out there.